Hello and welcome to this new episode of our podcast Peace Today, where we talk to people from all over the world who are committed to building a more peaceful and secure world for everyone. And today I'm talking to Pascal Lottaz, who is a professor, associate professor at Kyoto University on international relations. But you're a Swiss national. Um, Welcome, Pascal. We've talked before, and it's quite a while ago. Since then, it's incredible how many things actually changed in world politics, geopolitical relations, etc. Maybe give your first impression of how you feel over the last time we talked. It was I think right after 7th of October 2023, the start of the genocide in Gaza.
Yes, so thank you very much for having me back on, Jakob. It's a pleasure talking to you again. It's unbelievable to me that it has been already 2 years. But yes, I think the last time we talked was something like October 12 or 13 or something like that. I mean, it was actually the moment when it was clear that Israel would use tremendous force, but it wasn't clear yet how far that would go. And I remember we both said this is going to be horrible. And sure enough, it ended up like looking very much like genocide within less than 2 months. I mean, we must not forget the South African case for against Israel about genocide was put in front of the International Court of Justice in December 2023, right? 2 months after October 7th, because that's how fast it became clear that this is now genocidal. I mean, Israel has genocidal intentions toward Gaza and the Palestinians there, and it only got worse over time. So this was to me the most dramatic thing I have seen in my life, in terms of how an incarcerated group of people of 2 million got just bombed on a daily basis, and mass media still called it a war. I have never seen a war that just, with that ferocity, where an entire population just has no place to go. There's nowhere to go, and if they did go anywhere, it would be mass ethnic cleansing, right? And it was unfathomable. But apart from that, they can't. The borders are all closed, right? They couldn't go. I mean, it's just mass slaughter. And things got worse on the global scale, with the slaughter as well, in Ukraine, the way that war still didn't come to an end, despite the fact that Ukraine has been on the losing end of this war of attrition for 2 years, with Donald Trump, who's now claiming Greenland and invaded Venezuela, and two wars or warlike situation against Iran. It's an insane moment. It's an insane moment in world history, and people who a year ago or 2 years ago said, "Look, we are already inside World War III. We just haven't connected dots yet," like Dmitry Trenin in Russia. I mean, it seems more and more that they're actually right. I still hope that the worst can be averted, but really the escalation of the international situation is getting worse and worse.
Yeah. I remember being asked that in an interview. I think it might have been also 2 years ago, and I shrugged that off. I said, yeah, well, we are not really in a situation. Of course, we are behind Ukraine and supporting them, and Russia is on the other side, and it's super dangerous, but we cannot yet say that we're in a war. But increasingly, I have to say, yeah, maybe these are the opening salvos.
Yeah.
Are you really also thinking along those lines? What
I
do you
still,
expect? Yeah.
I still hope that the biggest type of escalation would, of course, be a superpower war, right? Between Russia and the United States, a direct exchange of blows, or China and the United States. And I still have to hope that it won't go that far. But anything below that is, to me, now thinkable, including that, certain corners of the warmongers are thinking about how to create a mega Ukraine out of Europe for Russia, right? How to mobilize the entire European population to fight a hot war with the Russians. And I sincerely hope that we don't go that way, and that in fact what Donald Trump is doing with Greenland actually might help us to get out of that kind of scenario, because even the diehard NATO-ists must realize by now that there's a problem when the only credible security threat to EU territory emanates from the United States and not anymore from Russia. I mean, the only one claiming EU territory is not Russia, is not China, it's the United States. I mean, this must lead to a change of thinking, even among the Eurocrats, for whom I have no regard at all and whatsoever. And it actually, the last couple of days showed, with the Germans even sending a couple of Bundeswehr soldiers over there, that they seem to be in uncharted territory that they don't know how to approach. So, in a sense, I have a hope that this shock kind of leads to a reassessment, because what we need is a Europe that stops warmongering and that just keeps within its own borders and tries to find some form of arrangement with the Russians. You don't need to love them, you don't need to embrace them, but you need to have an arrangement that actually stops the killing in Ukraine, and on the other hand prevents an escalation on the continent. And I did, for the longest time, it seemed as if though the whole European strategy is just to one for all for one with the United States against Russia, right? And let's defeat them, let's split them up, let's another Soviet Union moment, and then we will have won the war. And I hope that fantasy is finally coming to an end, and the realization that it's either a form of a grand bargain settlement or the end of Europe in a very physical way, and that if that realization seeps in, that you go for the smaller of two evils from the perspective of these people.
Yeah. So I'd like to continue talking about especially the EU, but and the role it's playing towards the other global players, but also towards its citizens. But before that, I still want to touch upon something that, I listen to a lot of experts and I read a lot about Trump, and it seems that nobody really gets to grasp him. So I mean, everyone is sort of outraged about what he's doing, but where one person can say, he's sort of rebuilding America along imperial lines and actually being the strong man. The other says, no, he's foolish. He's actively breaking down the US and it's all going to collapse, etc. So it seems that all analysts have been wrong somehow. No, I mean, I personally find it very hard to grasp the person and the policy, if you may speak of a policy. So how do you, after half a year or a bit more, of course, almost a year of Trump, how do you evaluate his personality, and where do you expect, seeing all these actions around Venezuela, Iran, Nigeria, the Christmas bombing of Nigeria, all this weird stuff? How do you evaluate this person, and how do you expect the US to operate in the world the coming years under Trump?
So I view Donald Trump as an extremely erratic person, but I think more importantly, I try to differentiate between him as a person and him as an administration. And the Trump administration, to me, seems very much, is itself very divided. There are different camps. There are different people who have his ear, and one of the things that seems to have become clear is that depending on who he speaks to and depending on who is right around him, he will change tune, and she will change tune quite dramatically. So Donald Trump, the political Donald Trump, is not one person. The political Donald Trump is an entire, entourage of people who pull and push on him in one way or another. And it seemed that from the very beginning, there were two camps, two factions in there. One, the kind of restrainers, let's call them that, around people like J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, the Witkov, who belong to the people who seem to have had an idea of like trying to do what's best for the United States by extracting the US from all of these useless proxy wars and whatnot. But on the other hand, he also has had the Rubios and Keith Kellogg, and he still listens and is buddies with Lindsey Graham and so on. Yeah, I mean, these people also have his ear, and he doesn't throw them away, not at all. He has them in his orbit. The thing that I still can't answer is if he is the manager of them, and then he plays one against the other and does his own game, or whether he is the ball that is also very much being shaped. I at the moment am rather in the court where I think he's very much being shaped by these people as well, and then some faction might with others gain more credence than at some point and lose at others, depending on how some of these projects work out. So the Venezuela affair, in my view, strengthened the hand and the cards and the arguments of Rubio, right? So we would rather expect more on that side, which maybe also explains why he's so bullish and hawkish now again on the on Greenland, because Venezuela showed no pure force, and good old Marco was right. Just go in, take him out, and then we've got the bastard, right? Whereas with Iran, he hit a brick wall back in July last year, right? During the 12-day war, he tried again, seems to have again hit a wall. So there's a different approach there, and it then leads to different people in the administration having his ear. So I view it a bit like this, but not whatever it is very, very it's a policy approach. Like, which policy do we take? Give me my options. And it's not a strategic approach. The only strategy
it seems like day to day he chooses, let's say, which day to go, which direction to go.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, there's two things. One is that he does have this idea of I want to be greatest president in the history since George Washington, or even bigger. So I need to enlarge. I need to be bombastic about it. And on the other hand, he seems to be a fan of constantly pressuring people. So the pace with which stuff is happening and the pace with which he's coming out with new stupid ideas like the tariffs and so on, what it creates is just a constant pressure, and it actually constantly pushes the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese into a reactive position where they have to find answers to what the US is throwing over, and the moment they have one, they throw another one. So that for 1 year, in my view, has been going on.
But my real question is, like almost everyone says he's not the most smart person in the room. He is just, indeed, what you say. It's the use of force and the disregard of anything that's regarded as, let's say, norms or international norms or relational norms or social norms. It's mainly brute force and bullying, and see what he can get away with. My question is actually, and what I'm actually surprised at is that, I mean, many people have sort of already said, America's this how you say century is already over. We're already far into decline, and Russia and China are coming up, and these are the new powers, and we will have a multipolar order, etc. So my question is actually, it's sometimes like with the capture of the kidnapping of Maduro, etc. These are perceived as successes somehow, and my question is this now going to work in any way? This bullying and this brute force approach to international politics, is this going to work in extending the life of the supremacy of the US in the world, or is it in the end self-destructive? I'm really wondering, because it seems that even with Greenland, he can just let's be frank, he can just walk in and take Greenland. There's nothing stopping him from doing that. Basically.
No, he doesn't even have to walk in. He has to walk out. I mean, US troops are in the barricades in Greenland. They can just walk out of the barricade, walk to the capital, and go to the city office and just hoist the US flag. And if anyone opposes, they shoot them. I mean, it's
Yeah.
that easy. So there's nothing that prevents that from happening. The only thing is that, it really uproots the entire way that the system of US domination the last 70 years, or at least the last 30 years of hegemonic domination used to work. Because what at least the last 30 years were about, but for Western Europe, even more than that in the Cold War, was buy-in, right? You have large parts, good parts of the globe, Western Europe, you have good parts of Asia, Japan, and others who buy in to the US empire and send their kids to US schools and have them educated in these elite circles and have them participate in these in all of these schemes and World Bank and IMF and previously the Bretton Woods system and whatnot and the petrodollar and so on and blue jeans and soft power and these countries wanted to be part of that, and that was a large part of what underpinned the structure through which the United States could build the global infrastructure, which then in return gives them this proportionate power that if somebody steps out of line, let's say Iran has a little revolution, right? And Shah is gone, the puppet regime of the US, and then actually a hostile government comes in, and then you just put sanctions and you strangulate them. Or with Cuba, right? You strangulate them and they don't want to go along. Well, you strangulate them and well, you'll get somewhere. But this dimension is losing. I mean, the more heavy-handed he goes about it, the more the others are building alternative. The more the others are working on something else, and we see that with BRICS. We see it with BRICS, and it's weakening the structural influence of the United States. Does it mean that this heavy-handed approach cannot have success? No, it can have success. Maybe Venezuela is going to be a great success.
But not only Venezuela, but sorry to interject, but you can just say, okay, you can say that it's changed. Okay, you can say it's changing the way America did things. First, more politely and economically, sanctions and buy-ins and those kind of things. Trump said, just to hell with it, you have to do it, or I'm gonna bomb you.
Yeah.
So he can say, okay, so what's the problem? We're gonna do it this way now, and we're gonna do it through force. I mean, the EU is listening. We are, yeah, you can say we are sort of stepping back a bit from the US international policy, but we are still following. We're still our markets still depend 100% on the EU. We are not going to move to China for now. We are still cutting off Russian oil. We are still shooting ourselves in the foot if US asks us to do so. So I wonder. I mean, Ursula von der Leyen going to Washington, promising how many billions? Do you know? Or trillion? I don't know. Just a price to be less sanctioned and have a access to the American markets.
Yeah.
We are still super subservient. And you're in Japan. I don't know how it is in Japan, but it seems that Japan is also still following U.S. rule, no, in a way.
Yes, I mean the Japan also has no interest of changing this. I mean the U.S.-Japan alliance is to Japan what NATO is to Europe. It's the alpha and omega of the entire security thinking. The prospect that this might go away is beyond scary, right? Because it's completely uncharted territory. That Japan is going along, yes and no. I mean, when it comes to the Ukraine war, for instance, Japan had more a policy like Switzerland, which is like we will support with everything except weapons. We don't send weapons, humanitarian stuff. When it comes to the tariffs, the Japanese were very angry. Very angry. They, in the end, found an arrangement, which is that the Japan will invest like 50 or more billion dollars into the U.S. economy. But however, that's the holdings of Japanese companies of money of US dollars that they earn in the US market that they're going to reinvest into the United States, which also means it will come along with holding with rights, right? The Japanese are going to hold rights over the investments that they make. So in the end, you get something out of it as well. And this we are not at the point where the United States has ever threatened yet to do something that they could do to one of their allies, but they haven't threatened it, which is the expropriation, just the outright taking away of assets. We're not at that point. We're at the point where they have threatened that in the EU against Russia with the frozen assets, right? But we are not at the point where the United States has threatened that to its allies. But we are headed towards that kind of point. The thing is, of course, that the integration of the economies and so on has been going on for the last 70 or 80 years. You cannot disentangle that from today until tomorrow. But if anything, this is now leading to the shift that these countries are starting to think about what do we do, the day after, once this kind of stuff happens. And in Japan, this, for instance, has been going on now since 2022 or 2023. When the Japanese actually said we're going to increase our defense budget from 1% to 2%. Under the Biden administration. In the West, this was all interpreted as, a great victory of the United States. Japan is finally stepping up and becoming more assertive. In China, it was looked at as, they're becoming more aggressive, which is also not a wrong way of looking at it. But one of the things is that they said, we will now develop indigenous capabilities when it comes to missile defense and missiles in general. Because in the West, this was seen as, great, Japan stepping up. It's like, no, it's part and parcel of losing trust in the United States. And of course, this is a 10-year project until they have the capacities they need in order to replace certain US systems, especially HIMARS and so on. But they're working on it now, and they've been working on it already for a couple of years. So what I'm saying is that under the hood, I believe very much that the structure is changing, even though on the outside we are still in the world that was built 20, 30 years ago. But it's changing, and the United States, in my view, is not going to be at the winning end of that, at least not the way that they were winning the last 30 years of the post-Cold War.
Yeah. So in the end, as a conclusion, you think the heavy-handed approach of Trump is not going to work. It's going to create more opposition than it's going to create strength or peace to strength or whatever the US wants to call it.
Yes, I mean I think it's relatively, strategically speaking, it's relatively simple. Yes, the United States might be able to prop up regimes like puppet regimes. But you can do that only so long. If you need to use force in every corner of the world in order to have your way, at some point it's going to break. No empire has ever survived the point where it needed to be in a multi-front war with everybody. The thing is, we need to dissuade the United States from going that route, because they do have the capacity to create tremendous damage and hurt. Right?
Exactly.
So we don't want that. That's why, the question to me is how to integrate the United States into whatever the post-US hegemonic system is going to be. Because they are the ones who seem to be resisting this at the most at the moment, whereas the Russians, the Chinese, the Brazilians, the South Africans are all working on trying to get to the point where you have, multiple poles, multiple centers, and decision making by consensus or by live and let live, basically. I mean, at least on the international scene, a democratic setup, not necessarily internally, but between the states.
And you're confident that the BRICS states won't be so distracted by all of the chaos that's going to be created in order to keep US power?
I mean, this is one of the strategies of the US, of course, and it wants to break BRICS. But the thing here is, again, I think what we see in the United States is a lot of policy making. Policy. BRICS is not a policy approach. BRICS is a strategic approach. BRICS is a coordination of policies, the way that the G7 used to coordinate policies. And you can try to disrupt that, but as long as there are states that want to coordinate among each other in various fields, that's not, it's not a question of like having a military alliance tomorrow. The military alliance is not what the goal is. It's like, let's coordinate our efforts in order to build together more than just the sum of what we can do as a collective, right? And that's a process. So BRICS is working on a process. The United States, in my view, is working on policies, and this process is just more resilient in the way what it is. Even if tomorrow Donald Trump managed to kind of regime change Iran, Would it hurt BRICS? I mean, yes, it would hurt. It would hurt where they were, but that wouldn't stop Russia and China and Pakistan and India from still trying to coordinate policies among each other. And even if India left that group, it wouldn't change the fact that you have interests in South America to coordinate with those. So it's like in terms of strategic development, I think the BRICS momentum can be slowed, but it's an approach and not a plan. Whereas the United States seems to constantly try to implement some weird plans, and they change them, and that's, in my view, not a good strategy unless I fail to see the larger strategy.
Yeah, some people say, yeah, Trump is playing like 5D chess, and we just don't see the big picture, and it's gonna end up like a master plan, etc. Anyway, like now let's turn to Europe. And before we continue to analyze this, you said something very interesting in the beginning. You said actually the weird situation, the totally unexpected, like it's also becomes hard for an analyst to look at the situation. Before you could say the US, Europe is being pushed into a war with Russia by US bigger, geopolitical interests. No, it's like the US who has a strategic interest in weakening Russia, so they're sort of fueling the conflict so that Europe might go and join the fight against Russia, so the US can stay aloof and. They can have the Europeans fighting Russia, weakening a geopolitical enemy. But the weird thing is now that Greenland suddenly has come about. Of course, already like Trump wasn't really trusted within European circles in holding the same line as Biden would do with regards to Russia, because he's as treacherous as talking to Putin, etc. So he wasn't already trusted, but now it's becoming really obvious. So there's this totally weird and unexpected situation that, for me at least, unexpected, maybe not for you, but that the EU is now alone, it seems, in its moral standing, because it's all very much brought as a moral conflict against authoritarianism, also under Biden, etc. That we have to stop the Russian bear in Ukraine, etc. And suddenly we, and the whole, as you said, the whole story, the whole narrative, what was called the domino effect of Ukraine falling, and then the next European countries, NATO countries would fall. And then suddenly we have a very real territorial claim of the US. And you said it's actually having a sort of beneficial effect somehow on the warmongering with regards to Russia. Can you explain a bit that situation? It's totally weird to me that it's actually happening, but
I mean, even the die-hard transatlanticists in Europe, the people like Friedrich Merz and Ursula von der Leyen and, all of the gang that are like wedded and joined by the hip to the Americans, because that's how they view themselves. We are like, we are one team. We are not Team Germany, Team France, Team UK. We are Team NATO. We are Team Transatlanticism against the hordes from the east, right? The Russian orcs. Yes. Even those people are now in a situation where they must say, like, wait a second, that is one bridge too far. I mean, Greenland is not only part of Denmark, is not only a part of an EU territory, it is a NATO member. And the US already has troops on Greenland. I mean, Greenland, for all intents and purposes, is absolutely completely integrated in all of the NATO strategies of like defense and whatnot. And if the US now says the only thing that will keep us safe geopolitically from the Russians is if we directly control Greenland, what they're of course also saying is that having Greenland in NATO doesn't save anyone. And it's like, that's the one thing you can do, right? It's like the one thing that you must remain on the same page, that NATO keeps NATO territory safe. So it's not only that a NATO country is threatening another NATO country, it's that NATO, the big brother, is saying, like, basically, you're not safe. Nobody of you is safe. I mean, and plus you're not safe from me. So this is very, it really reminds me of the process in which the Soviet Union basically went down, it didn't go down because Georgia wanted to wiggle free, or Ukraine, or because Poland kind of had a little revolution. It The Soviet Union broke apart because Russian nationalism came up, and Russia decided, I don't want this anymore. We don't want these pesky people, right? I mean, we are Russians, not Soviets, and that's what broke it apart. It was the core, a change in the politics and the political factions within the core that shattered the structure. So it's now there's a change in politics and political structure and political priorities in the core of the Western transatlantic alliance system. And this is, to me, so far, the biggest threat to the structure the way it is built, because if the kingpin doesn't want to do this anymore, has a different vision of the future, well, the others don't have much that they can do. And you can see how clueless the Europeans are, and they've tried to, go along as much as they could, right, with everything the Americans threw at them, including the tariffs, including a war of aggression with Iran, right? After 3 years of screaming a bloody murder, we cannot allow one country to invade another in Europe. The U.S. and Israel invade Iran, and then Mr. Merz says, like, well, they're doing the dirty work for us, right? We need to thank them. A genocide in Gaza, right? They accommodated that, saying like, nah, it's complicated, right? There's so many things that they were able to do, but this, to me, seems to be the one thing where even the transatlanticists need to say, like, we can't. So we are now facing that new reality, and what do we do? So
what
serves them right.
So what will they do? Because at the start of the Ukraine war, there seemed to be some kind of glee or sort of enthusiasm that finally it counts both for the EU and for NATO. Finally, we found some purpose, no? Like NATO has finally kind of show its worth. Finally kind of show that, we belong together and we're going to defend democracy together, all those rhetoric. And also for the EU, like finally there's some kind of, you felt that like the moral pressure. Finally, we can present ourselves as opposed to an authoritarian regime. We are the democracies, etc. So fast forward, how many years? 4 years, 5 years, or almost 4 years. There were people predicting that there will be cracks in both EU and NATO. What do you predict? How will EU handle this situation?
Well, we see already how poorly it is handling it, right? It's not only the pronouncements by Kaja Kallas and the entire idea of suppressing dissent at home and abroad. I mean, remember just how the EU reacted about the elections in Romania half a year ago or so, where they praised like the Romania basically cracking down against its own political democratic system, or how they tried to encourage riots in Tbilisi in Georgia, of course outside the EU, how the EU is praising basically a dictatorial turn in Armenia of the Armenian government cracking down against civil society in Armenia. So we see how the EU is actually, well, very much transforming into its opposite, and this goes hand in hand with how they're now trying to use sanctions as a foreign policy tool against dissent on the inside. So as any beleaguered militaristic system, and the EU is not a good militaristic system, but it has a militaristic mindset by now. Luckily, they don't have really the means for it yet, but the mindset is already there. And as any one of them will do, they're now turning inward, and they're becoming a mockery of their professed values, just like any kind of militaristic system becomes a mockery, right? How the Soviet Union of like, the workers, the party for the worker, not the party, sorry, the communism is the movement of the workers, always always clamped down against the workers, right? Unions were forbidden. You cannot unionize, you cannot get together. The workers were always like beaten into submission. These systems then just start turning on their values, and you can see how the EU is turning on their values extremely quickly and
So,
increasingly
yeah,
so.
of course, as leader, most listeners will know, you have a very interesting, a very popular channel online, Neutrality Studies, and you interviewed several of those people being sanctioned.
Yes.
Can you explain what happened to them?
So we have several individuals who are on this so-called Russia sanctions list. The EU has several sanctions lists that it uses as a foreign policy tool in order to, through coercion of individuals to try to bring about a change in their behavior. This was first put into place against, well, I mean, the history is a little bit longer, but in terms of Russia in 2014, and the idea was, okay, we sanction Russia as a state, but we also sanction individuals in Russia, especially businessmen and so on, close to Mr. Putin, in the hope that that will then lead to changes, and that because they want access to the EU market, they will then push for changes in Russia's policy toward the EU. That was the original idea. We've seen sanctions on the UN level. We've seen sanctions from the US and Europe for the longest time didn't use very much of those. And then it started, and then it really got out of hand, especially then in 2022 when they established this new sanctions list of entities. Anyone put on there, a company or a private individual, is forbidden from having a bank account in the EU. Is forbidden from any transactions to the EU. Is forbidden from EU institutions are forbidden from working with them. So any business in the EU is forbidden from having any kind of relationship with them. So you cannot transport these people. You cannot give services to them in any shape or form. And if you do, then you're committing a crime. Right, and then you can be persecuted under EU
But this
or
is
national laws.
intended for Russians.
And this is intended for foreigners, right? This is intended for targeted people on the outside. But now what we have seen is that first they started sanctioning several EU citizens who lived in Russia. Journalists, Alina Lip being one, a couple of people. And then in last year, actually already in 2024, they for the first time, they listed EU citizen inside the EU. So I think the first one was actually, I might be wrong, but I think the first one was probably this German citizen, Hüseyin Doğru, who's a German national. He's only a German national, even though the EU claims he's Turkish. He is not. That's a lie. He's a German and German national only and living inside Germany. And then these sanctions start having a completely different character, because if you live inside the thing where you're not allowed to have any money and make any payments and not even receive any food or whatnot, it basically becomes a very, very severe infringement on human rights. What makes this additionally outrageous is that he's not even sanctioned for what he did for reporting about Russia, but the little extract on the sanctions list says that he's sanctioned for supporting, Hamas, because he's basically he's a journalist who's in favor of Palestine and the Palestinian rights and so on, and he reported in that manner. And that's the reason why he has been listed, and all his company and his whole journalism has been made impossible. Plus severe human rights infringements.
And you talked to him?
I talked to him. I'm one of the people who misunderstood. I thought he was a Turkish national in Germany, but that's just a lie. His nationality in the sanctions list still says Turkish, but he says, no, that's a lie. I'm just German. I talked to him. I mean, he is surviving, but he cannot do anything. Recently, 2 weeks ago, actually, until 2 weeks ago, he was allowed to use 506 euros a month for food and to pay his rent. And 2 weeks ago, his bank even froze those accounts. So he has 0 accounts. His wife's accounts were frozen as well. He has 3 little children. I mean, they basically take away all means of survival. So the means of survival are by relying on neighbors and others. And the same goes for my countryman Jacques, who's a Swiss living in Brussels, and he cannot buy stuff if he
He's
didn't
an EU
have people who
citizen.
helped him.
Jacques Beau is also EU citizen himself.
Jacques Beau is a Swiss citizen, so not
Yeah.
an EU citizen, but he lives in Brussels. I mean, he's a legal resident of an EU country, Belgium. And he's actually, once the sanctions hit you, you are not allowed to travel through the EU anymore. Or if you're inside the EU, you're not allowed to leave your country. So he's legally not allowed to go back to Switzerland. And even if he did, he would be locked out. I mean, if he illegally decided to jump into his car and drive to Switzerland, he wouldn't be allowed to go back. So it's really a harsh treatment. And what makes it even more outrageous from the legal perspective is that neither Hussein Dogru, nor Jacques Beau, nor Nathalie Yamp, they didn't break any law. There's nothing illegal that they did, but the EU said on their own homepage, look, we're not punishing them for anything. We are educating them. We want a change in their behavior. And now we must just realize that we live in a world where the EU can infringe upon your human rights with the excuse that it wants you to change legal behavior. That is not a good development. And as a German lawyer and former president of the Germany's Verfassungsschutz, so the spy agency, the agency tasked with protecting and defending the German constitution, Hans-Georg Maaßen, as he told me, this is a tactic of the Eurocrats, and he actually cited the former Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker saying, like, look, when we do something, we just do it a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and we see how far we can go until we get public resistance. And that seems to be the strategy. See how far you can go, because this is, again, it's a foreign policy tool to like really crack down severely on protected rights of EU citizens inside the EU, of things that they don't like to see, but that is perfectly legal to do under EU law.
How is this legal?
It is legal in the sense that it is extra legal. So it is legal in the sense that the sanctions themselves are the prerogative of the EU, of the Council of the EU. Thanks to the Treaty of Lisbon and a couple of other treaties, the EU has the right to do foreign policy for member states, right? And within those rights, they have the right to take restrictive measures on. They have that right. And then they start doing that against citizens. It's nowhere it is defined that that's illegal. So they just do it. And what this does is it circumvents the normal judicial process in all of these countries. If this was a normal judicial process, what would have to happen is that in the EU Parliament or otherwise, or in national parliaments, you create a law that outlaws a certain activity. Let's say, okay, Russian propaganda. We're now going to outlaw doing Russian propaganda. We define what Russian propaganda is, what kind of acts count as such, and then we're going to have a bill in Parliament, and Parliament's going to pass it, and then government's going to ratify, going to sign it into law. And then from the moment that becomes law, then you cannot do this anymore. And then if you still do it, then the police will come after you, but then you can go to the court, first, second, third instance, maybe take it to the Supreme Court, litigate your case, right? That would be the normal structure. But all of this doesn't apply, because what the EU now just uses foreign policy to get at people directly. And the European Court of Justice has decided that it is the instance that can check if the accusations are correct or not, but it is not the instance to decide whether this is a good practice or not, because it is up to the Commission and to the Council to decide on foreign affairs. So they are not there. The European Court says, like, we are not the ones to judge whether this is right or not, whether this is justified or not. We will just check on the content of the sanctions. This is a horrible situation.
I think what you described is we see it in many European countries. Also, I recognize it from the Netherlands that politicians, especially those in the lead, like prime ministers, etc., they just go as far as they want to,
Mhm.
and just then see what happens. And I think it looks like the position of Ursula von der Leyen, which is a totally undemocratic position.
Mhm.
Um, every nation state could say, wait a second, you are not the one deciding over this or that matter with regards to finance or taxes or military spending or whatever. But she just does things and she arranges things. And whether that's legal or not, that's for later to decide. But we don't stop her, and we don't stop those bureaucrats. It seems
Yeah.
we let them do. And even what you said about the courts, like this, saying this is not our we've famous cases in the Netherlands also about clear injustice being done by Ministry of Justice with regards to well, it's a complicated story, but trying to obtain money from people who are suspected of fraud. This went way too far, and way too many people were being branded as fraudulent. But the court said, this is not our decision. This is, we cannot
Yeah.
really decide about this. We leave this to the executive. So more and more power is being left to the executive, and nobody's really stopping
Yeah.
it.
And this is a traditional process in especially militaristic societies, right, where the executive just claims rights that in reality should belong to parliament, to the
Yeah.
legislative. This has happened many times before. It just this time it seems to be coming from the executive center of the EU that now amasses this power. I mean, in the United States you have a similar case when about the presidency, right? What can the
Hmm.
presidency do
Yeah.
when they just create executive orders?
Yeah.
Because some executive orders then have the character of a law, and of course, laws should only be passed by parliament, and that's
Yeah.
currently what the EU is doing
Hmm.
with like using the executive branch taking over functions that in theory should belong to the judiciary only.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they just do it, and they
Yeah.
will do it as long as they can.
And also, Corona was a big sort of,
Oh yes,
let's say, testing ground for that. We had this emergency legislation,
oh yes,
etc.,
oh
which
yes,
didn't need to go through
yes,
parliament and those kind of things.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, yes. So it's an
So,
erosion. It's an erosion of the separation of the powers in Europe.
but can Europe hold under these circumstances? Can Europe, as a EU, can it get stick together under these circumstances of wildly diverging interests, of pressure of the US, of an European elite that is totally disconnected to ordinary citizens, etc. What do you expect the EU to become?
No, I mean the EU, the way we know it, is dead one way or another. It will
Yeah.
either correct and give more competences again to the member states and
Hmm.
become and go back to its roots and be an economic
Hmm.
union and
Hmm.
de-escalate this current situation, or it will get worse and it will amass even more powers and create even more elite centers and maybe have a what you would need is only one kind of integration point, let's say a minister of defense, like a proper minister of defense that is the named minister of defense, and under him the generals, and then the militaries are mandatorily integrated. And then on the something like that, you could have an extension of this not only the militarism but the anti-democratic rule by decree. It could be a minister of finance if they decide to have like one single pot of money and one single minister who then has this portfolio and can circumvent the decision-making mechanisms. And if none of if the member states don't push back, you could have more integration through that. So either way, the EU as we know it in 2025, 2026, in my view, is doomed. I hope it will de-escalate and actually pedal back to what it used to be good at. But there is a danger that it will, this rule by decree and crack down through sanctions and crack down on dissent and maybe forbidding the AfD in Germany and dissolving, like cracking down on French dissent and so on. That might get worse.
And you
It's
had a small
absolutely
taste of
thinkable.
that. You had a small taste of that of your own channel being removed for a while, no?
That one I think is not connected to that one. I
Okay.
do,
Okay.
YouTube currently has the problem that through because of AI, there's a massive increase in spam channels and like real spam channels.
Okay.
People
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
imitate people like Jeffrey
Yeah.
Sachs, Mercury's, and
Yeah.
YouTube must increase its spam filter, and I got caught in that spam filter, and then the question
Okay.
is how to get out of it. So I do interpret what happened to me as
Okay.
disconnected from that one.
Okay. So final question. I know you're not official EU citizen, although you're right in the middle of a lot of EU countries as a Swiss citizen. How do we operate, or what recommendation would you give to ordinary citizens who want to resist the, let's say, of course, we all wish for the de-escalation, but we see a lot of authoritarian characteristics developing very rapidly, of course, in the US, but then soon enough and already happening in the EU, as you've been describing. So what recommendation would you give to EU citizens at this moment? Because we are divided among nations. I mean, we can have a civil society in Germany and in France and in Belgium, but there's no real European civil society protesting against EU or something. It's all, we are divided in a way. What can we do as EU citizens in this very difficult, very weird and unpredictable, but obviously very dangerous moment?
I mean, I think the EU, it can, the process this toward a much more dictatorial future can still be stopped. I don't think everything is lost. So one of the most basic and probably most important things to do is just to have your displeasure registered. Write emails, write a letter to, your local representative, to whoever you can think of who works in that circle, right? Or to your own government. I mean, whoever you can think of as being part of that world, write them. And register your displeasure. And if you're the activist type, do organize and rally and a protest against EU sanctions on EU citizens in Brussels or in the Hague or in Berlin or in Paris. And maybe one of the things is the easiest trick, of course, is to divide this kind of opposition to the current course among left and right and whatnot, and just say like, no, it's, look, if I'm a lefty, but I have friends in the conservative or the right wing camp who share my disagreements, or who share my fears, then we will protest together, right? I mean, coalition building based upon interests and not based upon groups. That's how it should work. And
it's a difficult thing, I can tell you. Yeah,
it's a difficult thing, of course. But I keep saying I'm very much in favor of Switzerland's Neutrality initiative, which was launched more or less by right-wing circles. But I keep saying, look, if that blind chicken finds a corn, I'm not going to take it away from it. I would be an idiot, because if we have a common interest, then we work together in that sector. And then when we disagree again, then we work with others. That's just how the political system is supposed to work anyhow. So long story short, just ask yourself through letters or emails or petitions or through protests, how can you directly do a little thing? But a little thing by a lot of people can go a long way.
Pascal, thank you so much for this time you spent with us on this podcast. Thanks for your insight. You talk to a lot of wise people on your channel, so you have a lot of insights in world affairs and in how it's going in every country. Thanks also for the hope you're sharing that we are not definitely doomed into some sort of future dictatorship, and we can resist this in a peaceful manner. Thank you so much, and I hope to talk to you at a later stage.
Thank you, Jakob.